Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Mumbai Angels Network's Reboot. India is currently in different phases of unlock to overcome the uncertain times and restart the economy. In this edition of Mumbai Angels Network's Reboot, we are geared to talk of key sectors who have emerged as game changers. The sector in focus today is information technology enabled services. The session is divided into 40 minutes of panel discussion and 20 minutes of Q&A. Do send us in your questions during the chat. Our team will curate it and we'll try our best to get them answered by our esteemed panelists. A request to all audience, please keep your devices on mute to enable better participation. Our panelists for today are K. Balachandran, co-founder and director of IRIS Business Services Limited, which is an India headquartered global regtech company. He brings about 28 years of rich experience in financial analysis, corporate finance, and structured data reporting solutions. He also spearheads IRIS's entry into the GST compliance and related solutions business. Balachandran has been associated with the electronic standards for financial reporting in India right from the early days. IRIS is globally recognized as one of the leading companies in the extensible business reporting standard XBRL-led solutions. The next panelist for today, Arun George, Head Software, Eximius Design. Arun has over 20 years of experience in the wireless communication and embedded software space across product and service companies. During his tenure in companies such as Microsoft and NXP Semiconductors, Arun has successfully led large R&D programs involving smartphone chipset development and platform development, wireless protocol stack development, as well as mobile application development. More recently, in the services space, he has built and managed high-performance engineering teams for market leaders in the semiconductor, Internet of Things, and automotive verticals. The next panelist for today, Prashant Swadi, is a global delivery head SAP, SuccessFactors, and intelligence spend at Cognizant. Prashant has more than 27 years of experience in helping organizations across the world achieve operational excellence through IT-led business transformations. From designing complex solutions at one end to business consulting initiatives such as process redesign, organization restructuring, change management, job evaluations, competency frameworks. On the other hand, Prashant has also spearheaded innovation in AI and mobility. As a business leader, he has been instrumental in growing centers of excellence in SuccessFactors, Concur, Ariba, S4HANA, Finance, and earlier SAP HCM and FICO. Currently, he leads the SAP HCM and intelligence spend practice globally at Cognizant. The session today will be moderated by Dr. Naga Hanumaya, Director, Central Manufacturing Technology Institute, Bangalore. Dr. Naga Hanumaya is a distinguished scientist and has served CSIR, Central Mechanical Engineering Research Institute, Durgapur, as Chief Scientist and Head, Micro Nano Systems Technology Group for more than 2 decades. He received his PhD from IIT Bombay, Masters in Tool Engineering from Indo-Danish Tool Room, Bangalore, and Bachelor's in Mechanical Engineering from Bangalore University. He has 27 years of professional experience, including 22 years in R&D, 3 years in teaching, and 2 years as a tool designer in industrial tool rooms. I take this opportunity to thank our panelists for their time and for giving us and our audience this opportunity to learn from their experience and insights. Without taking any more time, over to you, Dr. Naga Hanumaya.
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Let me thank Mumbai Angel Network, particularly Kushi, Shivangi, and Shilpa and their team for hosting this webinar and entrusting this responsibility on me. As it has already been introduced by Ms. Shivangi, we have with us 3 domain experts as a panelist. I welcome all of them for the session. I also welcome the audience who have joined this webinar. Friends, all of us, no matter what we do, irrespective of our profession, we all have got benefited from information technology enabled services to a great extent. Just for the sake of understanding what ITES do us is that enables us to provide or to obtain better services by exploiting IT capabilities. IT-enabled services are being offered in many areas, starting from medical transcription, document processing, data entry, warehousing, IT help desk, application development, ERP, telecommunication services, and so on. In the past decade, this IT-enabled services upgraded itself from supporting routine and repetitive tasks to provide the intelligence for resource-efficient, productive, globally coordinated value chain in every sorts of these industries. If you look at on the other side, the COVID-19 pandemic influenced many changes in all fronts of our human life. It is expected to see the changes in human behavior. For some time, our perception being a citizen, being an employer, employee, and customer would also change at a scale. If we get into the operation level, they focus on two, as you all know, first is healthcare emergency, how to contain the spread of coronavirus. And the second is how to sustain economically with resulting doubts and uncertainty in demands. If you look at current priority in the manufacturing, the need of reducing the total cost of ownership of a product becomes the major driver for the innovation. This is true for the country as a whole and also true as the individual manufacturing setup, irrespective of the scale of operation. Globally, there are concerted efforts to stabilize the world trade and economic growth. Every country has proposed economic packages, which are traditional approaches to boost the people concerned. But the long-term strategies must be taken not only on the global reality, but also by considering the weakness and costly decisions made by us at operation level. In India, with unfettered market-led globalization, unfortunately, manufacturing industries operate with full dependency on import for technology, material, and supply chain. That too, in many cases, with single source. But it is now realized the idea of gated globalization that ensure gaining currency by promoting creation and development of indigenous technology, multiple value chains, and alternative supply chains. So in this context, this webinar is very important to look at how one can use IT-enabled services as a tool to reboot ourselves. So our panelists having wider experience in IT services, both as a service provider, developer, and the user, I'm sure they will cover the concerns which are expressed by many of the audiences, both in the perspective of service providers as well as the user's perspective. This session will have 2 rounds of discussion. The first round, I request all the panelists to share their general thoughts with respect to IT-enabled services and their practical examples. Once we complete the first round, then in the second round, we'll move to a focused discussion on 4 identified points. That is the role of analytics, technology leveraging for innovation, investment in IT-enabled services, and scaling of the organizations. So now I request Mr. Balachandran to start.
Thank you, Dr. Naga. Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here. I'm hoping that all of you can hear me. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, that's good. So thank you, Mumbai Angels, for inviting me for this discussion. It's a privilege. Very happy to be here. I'll primarily speak from my experience as an entrepreneur. We have been at this business for quite some time now. We started our entry into this ITES area as a KPO, knowledge processing outsourcing company, way back in 2005 when we were working with financial reporting mandates with the XBRL standard. Then we are migrated, and now we are a platform business, and we have a product-driven approach and that is primarily the outcome of the transformation that we are seeing in the ITES sector as well. So if you go back and look at how this sector has evolved, you can see this came because there was a confluence of telecom, large telecom pipes along with the advent of internet. And of course, you had this famed cost arbitrage all put together. You saw the birth of the ITES industry. And there are many companies which sprung up. There has been gradual consolidation. If you see all the last many years, you see large companies which have more than one practice. They have gobbled up smaller companies, and you have companies who have mastered 2-3 large processes, typically to very large customers. That's what we have seen. At the same time, we are seeing now in India also there's demand emerging, not just globally, for ITES services. And the demand is for a different kind of, or different combination of offerings, which people are looking at very actively. So things are active, things are dynamic, but the industry is changing. So it is just not that you have one process, you throw people at it, you try to master the process, and you take the process from a customer, so everyone benefits because of the cost arbitrage. So that is changing. So the business is, at one end, it is becoming one of scale. It has already happened. For example, you saw the Infosys large deal with Vanguard Industries about a week ago, which is, I think a classic BPM kind of deal. But people like us who are much smaller, we now are looking at how to build IP-driven products. And you have a blended offering through which you can address customers, not necessarily large customers, a range of customers, because you come with technology, domain understanding, and the process together, which makes sense for the customer. The customer might not take the same, same menu. All customers might not take. They might take a mix, but you have the capability to offer that, and you can scale because now technology offers platforms that are built on the cloud technologies and technologies, and you have the ability to customize your requirements. The transition in India is at the cusp of it. You have a lot of bright people. You are looking at how to build IP. If you can build IP on top of processes and then even transform the process, that will become very important. I'll briefly tell you what happened in our case. We were working with financial reporting, external reporting for companies which have to file these reports with the stock exchanges or capital market regulators, in certain cases central banks. So SEC of the US came with this requirement, and all the large companies need to file. So they started shipping files, all confidential documents before the results are published. Then people like us convert them using the XBRL standard into reports and then put it back. Then the technologies changed, requirements changed. People didn't want to ship documents. They want a collaborative environment through which you author documents, then you convert them into the required format, and then you ship. You need to bring the technology to make that happen. So that's what people like us have been doing. So I'm just saying that there's exciting potential ahead. It is very dynamic, and one can look at where value can be added in this chain, which itself is changing quite rapidly. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant. Can I request Prashant Swadi?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think so. I come from an organization and I've spent considerable time delivering, more of solutions like SAP, where you already have a solution, and then we build on top of that in terms of how we configure that for the customer, as well as how we consult around, as Dr. Balachandran said, the processes, right? We reimagine the processes, and then we implement the technology on top of that. Now, if you look at this technology, it historically started off with a lot of on-premise systems and heavy customizations, and then it has evolved into SaaS models, where it's more. I would not quite use the word plug and play, but it's more ready to use, where it's more of fit to standard rather than fitting the gap. So and today. One of the key trends that we see here is we see that companies want to put in the user experience first, in the sense that rather than starting off in terms of the design, the basic processes, where we would start off with something like, say, a business process re-engineering and then get into IT. The whole thing has come around over the last 20 years where you say that, hey, what is in for the end user? So can I define some personas in the organization, the key personas, and say that what does this mean for the CFO? What does this mean for the CHRO? What does this mean for the man on the shop floor? And then design the user experience, and then go backwards and then say what is the kind of solution I want to put in place to ensure that you get the right level of user experience. So that's one of the main, I would say those are the changing shifts that we are seeing, and the way we are responding to customers is to put together a methodology that starts with the definition of user experience and then goes on to technology. Now, having said this, one of the other trends that we also see in our business is, well, customers are increasingly demanding what they call as a pay-per-use model. So while earlier they would contract with a hardware vendor, a software vendor, and so now they're saying that, hey, we don't want that. We don't want the entire hassles of dealing with multiple vendors. Why don't you take a look at, why don't you take over everything? By everything, it means the technology. In case of SaaS models, it's often the subscriptions, the implementation, the support, and then even going down and doing the business process operations. So for example, if you're putting in an HR solution like SuccessFactors, it would mean that we as a service provider would get in the platform. We build a solution on the platform, and then we contract with the customer and say that you pay us per user or per payslip or per expense report, and then we will provide the whole thing as a service, which starts with the implementation and the support. And hey, if it is for back office functions like HR administration or financial services, we will also do the operations for you. So what the customer gets is end-to-end services. So that's probably the second trend. I would probably also look at the last 2-3 months and some of the challenges that this has for the IT industry. So while earlier we were more used to, how do I say, going to the customer side and then having people, 5 people, 10 people on the customer side, an offshore team in India, and then delivering the project. So COVID has completely turned that around, and it has forced us to look at alternate ways of deployment. And today, I actually have a project running in the US, which is staffed by people from the US, people in UK, people in Norway, and people in India. And all are working from their respective residences, and this is getting orchestrated as a project team that is virtually global. So what does this also mean for companies like us? I would say if you take this and you juxtapose this against the whole crowdsourcing and the gig economy, you'll see that an interesting trend is emerging where you also, you can quickly scale up startups and then get into this space because you don't really need the brick and mortar of large organizations in terms of setting up these kind of businesses. So yeah, so these are some of the main trends that I see.
So Prashant, may I request Mr. Arun George?
Yeah. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I primarily come from a technology provider or a technology enabler company. Eximius Design has been designing chipsets, solutions, which in turn are used by some of these experts and some of these solutions that the experts have brought up. So the nature of our solutions usually started off with edge devices where data is is consolidated, and data is input itself, and then you have a set of technologies that will move the data from those edge devices, and then present it in a cloud where it is automated. There is some analytics that's done on it, and so on and so forth. So when you look at these, let's try and understand what are these edge devices, and how does this handle some of these services that we're talking about. So we have technologies such as RFID. We have newer technologies that are used in handheld scanners and so on. So many of you would have come across those barcode readers that are used in when you board an Indigo flight, for instance, right? So these are, they basically scan your boarding pass, collect data on you, and then ship it down, send this data across to a server. From the server, it goes out to a cloud. So we develop the chipsets that are necessary to enable all aspects of this till it goes to the cloud, and till that data goes through some automation, and some analytics is done through it. How has all of this changed? The space by which the pace of adoption of this technology has significantly increased, and it's been influenced by factors that we never saw coming. For instance, if you look at one of our customers and that was using RFID, I gave you the example of using these hand scanners for pre-boarding operations, but during this COVID time and afterwards, a lot of this was deployed in the medical community, right? And you had hospitals in New York using these barcode readers to identify patients, and to use some of these technologies to make sure that processes for hospital management, etc., were adapted or were streamlined. So technology started to be, the pace of adoption of technology in areas that we had not foreseen would happen, were forced to by the COVID. So that's one example. Next, you have the influx of wireless communication technologies. We've all heard about 3G, 4G. Now there is 5G, right? And one always had to justify why these technologies needed to be put in place, and why the investment for all of this had to be. But again, the changing dynamics of the workspace, the fact that people are working from home, you need higher bandwidth, very low latency, which means not only is it enough that you have to send out a lot of data, but that data has to have very low latency. So it becomes imperative that we adapt technologies like 5G, etc., into areas that we didn't envisage in the past. And then comes hyper automation, right? The need to go beyond the basic aspects of automation, and to think, like Prashant mentioned, to make sure that people working across the globe are able to use data simultaneously, and automate it to the extent that was never even thought to be necessary in the past, have all changed. And all of this is really pushing technology, in the sense that our customer demands have increased in virtualization, in artificial intelligence, in communication, and all of these areas in the past.
Thanks, Arun. So I think one primary question, since we are essentially an investment platform, the question that keeps coming back to us, and which we would request the panelists to take a shot at, is what are the kind of investment trends that you are seeing in the technology segment, in the ITES segment? Has it really gone up? Like one of you mentioned the recent deal, and apart from that, like, are smaller businesses able to raise that kind of capital? Is there like a trend in M&A? Is there something that you have come across recently? So if each one of you could just share your perspective.
Okay, I'll go first.
Sure.
So I also
Yeah.
don't head of the CFO of the company. We are a listed company. So we do
Right.
speak to investors quite a bit. So what I see at this point of time, there is interest, but the interest is in pockets. It's not that there is interest across the board in the ITES space. That's what I gather. I'm not an expert, but from the limited interaction that I had, there's interest when there is an ability to scale fast. And there are pockets where that scope exists, for example. For example, we are speaking to certain customers, certain partners in the area of digital lending using GST data. And these
Right.
kind of companies are getting a lot of traction in terms of potential investment by investors. So my short answer is, I don't think this is an area where these are times when there is euphoria in terms of making investments across the board. There are people who are interested, but they are a little choosy. But the times are still pretty good. That's what I would say.
Right. Balachandran, just as a continuation to that, has the nature of the question that the investor is asking shifted? Is there more push on valuations? Are they like asking more questions in terms of your runway management? Has the nature changed in terms of the questions coming to you?
Of course, the valuation number to some extent is linked to two things. One is what is happening in the market overall, how valuation is trending,
Right.
especially for companies which are not really very small, or they have sort of left their initial Series A kind of funding time beyond. But there is some valuation pressure, I would think, because overall valuations are compressed. So people are not in a hurry to raise money either. But valuations could still be attractive from whatever I hear by speaking to a few entrepreneurs, that when the growth perceived is going to be very high, or they feel that you can quickly dominate or you can fold up other competitors fairly fast, then there is interest as well. So again, it's a mixed bag. But for a typical listed company, or there are some benchmarks, etc., valuations right now, I would say, tend to be on the lower side, especially in India. For example, when I look at a RegTech company, RegTech industry, scenario, if you go abroad, you get typically, 5x of top line as a valuation metric. India, it is not so, because India, that kind of mindset hasn't come. And certain areas which is B2C, I think people are still willing to look at large valuation numbers. This is what I perceive at this point of time.
Prashant, what are the trends that you're seeing across Europe?
Well, I think not just Europe, but I would probably say that looking at Cognizant as a large company where we also acquired organizations, I would say that the trend is one, digitization. Any company that offers services, and especially which has IP, intellectual property in this area, I think that's a good source. Second is, as Arun mentioned, right? If you have some of these scanners, some tools or something that you have built, I think that's a big plus. And the third is a domain. I think most of the IT industries are looking for domain expertise now, whether that's life sciences, whether that's say oil and gas or whatever. They're looking for that domain, that the experts in that particular industry, because unless we, especially today working with SaaS products, where we have to convince the customer that, hey, we can't customize this for you, but you have to adopt the best practices. So what are those best practices pertaining to the industry? So I would probably say cutting edge digital tools and domain are two areas where companies like us are trying to focus on.
You mentioned best practices. So has there been any shift in the definition of what one would define as best practices in these, I would call it post-COVID times now? I think COVID's there and been done with. So has there been a shift?
Well, yeah, when I said best so when I say best practices in which companies execute their businesses. So yes, COVID would definitely change things, but I would say that the way the industry functions, for example, if you're looking at manufacturing, a lot of things would remain the same. I don't see those things changing much. Where I see more of the changes is more around the experience part of it, the experience management, whether it's customer experience management, whether it is the employee experience management. As I said before, it's not so much now as in terms of having the person in front of you. It's more about what you can offer, even though you might be 5,000 kilometers away. So so we concentrate around best practices around the industry, and I would say that many of these best practices are continue to be similar. We see differences in terms of how we engage with the stakeholders. I would say put customer on one side. I would put the employees and of course your course user community in the middle.
Sure. Arun, would you like to take a shot at this?
Yeah, so talking about how about the industry and the deals that we've seen, it's been a mixed bag, I should say. And like Prashant mentioned, a lot of it has to do with the domains that we're speaking about. Some domains have been more prone, or the impact has been significant in certain domains compared to others. For instance, if you take a look at the automotive industry and the impact on the automotive industry, it's been a little more significant than it has been with respect to typical semiconductor. On the typical semiconductor industry, it's been there's been a positive impact. The people are seeing the need to adapt technology at a much faster rate than they thought in the past. So we've seen larger deals. We've seen deals close in the semiconductor industry, whereas some industries like the automotive. Another example would be the tourism industry, travel and tourism industry per se. They've been significantly impacted, and any software services or platform services that we would have otherwise designed, or any applications that we would have designed for them, have less takers, and I could clearly see some dullness out there as compared to significant pickup on the on certain others. So I don't think there's a universal answer to about whether deal size, how deal size are affected. I would say it's a case-to-case basis and highly dependent on the industry. Some impact on the geography as well, because we are seeing certain trends, certain cautious approaches in certain geographies, while others continue to be as aggressive as they used to be. So that's the trend.
Right. So if we were to actually define the top 3 pivots that companies in this segment have had to implement in their businesses, what in your view would be that? Like if I would say a new founder today of a business in this segment, what are the top 3 things that I would need to keep in mind or maybe pivot around to remain relevant, say in the next 12 to 18 months? Because from what we understand at Mumbai Angels, from what the feedback that we've been getting constantly from founders, is what they need to define their survivability for the next 12 to 18 months. So what, according to the panel, would be the top 2 or 3 pivots that founders need to focus on to remain relevant?
Okay, so I'll go again first.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Okay. So to my mind, I think the 3 things that are important. First one would be don't lose a customer. That's very important. If you have customers, stay very close to them, keep them in a tight embrace. Make sure that you don't lose your customer. That's very important. If you are at the stage where you are just about to get customers, make sure that you are in communication. You keep them excited. That is the point number 1. I'm talking from a 12 to 18 months time frame. That's what we have been trying to do in our business, even though we are not a very early stage company. We're trying to make sure that even though we might get hit by margins, don't try to don't lose customers. So that's number one. Number two, I would think that, you know, if you can build and deepen your IP, which is what even Prashant mentioned in his earlier point, that's very important. That is what is going to, you know, hold you in long step. So that is the other thing. Wherever, you know, you have embarked on a journey to create IP, don't lose that. That's very important. From a third is, of course, from the money resource point of view, you might not be able to, you know, get fundraising done quickly. That one has to be completely cognizant of. That being the case, you need to be very prudent with the way you handle money. If it is a bootstrapped kind of company, people need to take sacrifices. Things will turn around soon, but you need to initially go through, a tight-fisted approach. Of course, the government is helping as well. If you are MSME registered, of course, that thing is not moving as fast as what we expected. But if you have a IT return, if you have a GST return, etc., you should be able to get some working capital term loan kind of facilities as well, which is not bad because the terms are quite attractive. So I would say the third thing is to be very careful about how you manage the resources. Don't be profligate.
Sure.
Yeah. So if I were to look at maybe 2 or 3 top things, I would probably say, as Dr. Balachandran said, right, keep the customer close to you. And how do we do that? I think every challenges in terms of navigating through these tough times. I think it all starts in terms of what is it that we probably as experts need to bring in the thought leadership and say that what can we do to ensure that the IT initiative that we are planning give you that ROI, so that the initiative pays for itself and you're not really investing. So and this coupled with what I said earlier, and this is I'm observing that customers are increasingly getting interested in this, is rather than asking customers to say that, hey, you need to shell out this much money for technology, we get into a model where we say that you only pay for services. So that's the opposite of a CAPEX. That's completely OPEX. And today, when customers have cash flow issues, not willing to shell out money, an OPEX model goes a long way. And when we bundle the IT, the solution, the services, and the operations into an OPEX model, the customer is more likely to take up services like this. And on top of that, when you show that this is going to actually give you a return and this is going to pay. So that's what we've done for a customer. We've shown that over 5 years, you are not actually paying for anything. This is completely OPEX. So your cash outflows are less. And at the same time, you're getting benefits. And also in today's times, customers are not willing to wait for those benefits to accrue at the end of a year-long or a 2-year-long cycle, right? Most of the SaaS models work on are more agile. So you need to keep every 2-3 months or every 6 months, keep giving something back, some low-hanging fruit in the beginning, and some benefits as you go along. So over that journey, you are actually telling the customer that, one, you don't have to spend anything upfront, and I keep giving you benefits. So if companies get into that mode of operations with their customers, I think over the next 12, in addition to, of course, what we spoke earlier in terms of the digital tools, IP, etc., I think that would go a long way.
Arun, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I would go back to the fundamentals, basically your employees, your customer, and your operations. And I would look at these along 3 parameters or 3 different approaches, basically. What do you do with them now, as in the midst of the COVID scenario? And how do things change in each one of these aspects? Then how do you envisage this to change further when we come out of all this lockdown and probably a vaccine is invented, and how does life change after that? And the third parameter is to accept the fact that some things will never come back, will never be the same again, right? And across all of these factors that I mentioned, whether it's about HR or employee practices, whether it's about how we deal with customers, or how our operations are changing. So along these three axes, we have to mold, or we have to rethink the three fundamentals of the business that we've always been doing, and how does that impact? A trivial thing like you may have an operation, or you may have a set of employees that are happily working, that you think are happily working away from home, but the impact of this long-term isolation, and the impact of all this of their behavioral changes that have happened over the last 2 to 3 months, in my mind, is not going to be seamless. That has to be tackled very, very closely, and this is where HR and your leadership has a much more important role to play. This is the time where you need to reach out more. You need to spend that effort to engage your employees. Although you think you're getting you're continuing to get what you used to, that there might be hidden aspects of that that you need to pay attention to. Second, I agree with Bala 100%, is to make sure that you focus on your key customers, make sure that this is a moment of give and take. You have to go back and empathize with your customers. This is not the time to make sure that you get in those extra margins, but there has to be that empathy that the customer also sees in you, and I'm sure this is going to pay dividends down the line. But in terms of that emotional connect with your customer, that empathy needs to come in, and it needs to be demonstrated on the ground. And finally, a significant way in which the operations are changing, not just from the technology aspect, but the whole way of working, then that means that you relook at those resources that are useful to you, or useful to to your operations. I mean, are all the labs that you needed still, are they still relevant? Can you do a lot of this? Can you consolidate them? Can you automate some of those? So you have to relook at all aspects of the operations along those three axes that I mentioned, which means now, the future, and things that will never come back. That's the way I see it.
Thanks, Arun. So when you're talking about retaining the client and ensuring, even in terms of your employee engagement, that it is 100%, I think one key challenge that comes up is how do you do this remaining 100% online? Because I think most technology businesses to start with the larger ones have taken a company-wide decision to continue the work from home model. So we actually have an audience question in that context. This one is for Prashant. So in these COVID times, how are you providing end-to-end solutions to clients only by the online means? What are the challenges? What have been the solutions that the company has looked at? Could you elaborate on some of these?
Sure. So in order to understand how we are delivering solutions in today's times, I think, an example of a life cycle of a project for us. So if you're looking at, say, an SAP solution, like say, whether it is S/4HANA, SuccessFactors, Ariba, these, especially the cloud solutions, SuccessFactors, Ariba, Concur, they are housed in some data center somewhere in the world. You don't have them, the customer doesn't have it on premise. It's a SaaS model, right? So they are in a data center. So when we work on these solutions, we are always logging into the cloud and then making changes there. So a typical software lifecycle would be, we do a design and we show them the solution, and then we keep on iterating the solution until the time the customer is satisfied, user testing, and then when we cut over. That's what we do. Now, in this kind of a situation, whether, say, the design session, whether you have someone sitting around a table and then a customer explaining a process, and then we kind of understanding the process, coming up with a design, there is no reason why this can't be done virtually. And we've done this. We have had the customers sitting in his home, and then we've had customers, consultants joining in from different geographies and doing a design session virtually. And then doing the configuration, again, it's a SaaS product. It's not on premise. It's always sitting in some data center somewhere, just like a Gmail or something. So you can sit anywhere and configure it. The challenges here, I would say, is one is data privacy. We need to be extremely careful about ensuring that we do not expose the data. And for that, there are different ways of doing it. One is, of course, the product itself comes in built with a lot of checks and balances. But we also have to have certain very stringent procedures in terms of who can access data, what are the permissions, who can log into the system. And we also have scrambling tools for scrambling data. So we ensure that even though people are working from home or remotely, data privacy is not compromised to any extent. The second thing is the whole, as Arun brought up a very important point, right? The whole well-being of the employees, because you have, as I gave an example earlier, we have people working from different geographies on a project. So you'll have people working in different time zones, and that's not very healthy. So we do have to take care that how we staff people on projects. Sometimes, yes, people have to join at maybe a late hour. And I think I found customers very, very accommodating. I think customers also believe that, hey, if we do this project slightly towards the evening, it makes it easier for someone, or do it early morning. It's in the US, it makes it easier for someone in India to join. So I think our customers have been quite understanding. And I think if we kind of manage that with a little bit of hardships here and there around, say, working in shifts kind of a situation, we should be able to pull it off. I would not say that we will continue in this model going forward now that we are hopefully emerging out of this COVID situation. But I don't think we'll go back to the old way of working, because customers have also realized that this model works and it works well. Yeah.
Arun, Balachandran, any thoughts on the same question?
Only one point to add. We have also seen that it's easier to do the sales process to customers virtually. Once the COVID situation arose across the world, people are more accommodating. And you don't have to, actually do this physical sales calls and try to convince the customer to take the product. People are really willing to listen to you online, and that is a tendency which I see more and more, even for purchases which are not very low value. So there is an overall across the globe, I think there is a shift towards working virtually. And even trying to interact with people who might be, you might be someone who you're interacting for the first time, but doing that as a business transaction. So business transactions, even from the sales point of view, are slowly moving virtual. Of course, the data privacy issue exists. You can't wish that away. That's very important. I think we still haven't really seen how bad it could get. Suppose something goes wrong in a world where everyone works from home. So there is that danger. So on the whole, I think we are not going to completely go back to our old ways of working. That's what I would think.
Sure. Arun, any additional thoughts on this?
So again, if we stick to, I'll come back even in this case and say, stick to the fundamentals and get that right, okay? And here, that means identifying the most important data that you need to protect, and you need to encrypt the type, classifying that data, to ensuring that you have the right set of technology whether it is encryption, whether it is data transfer technology and all of that. And three, identifying that the vulnerabilities or the points where data is at rest or in transit and all of that is secure, will ensure that if you take care of all of this, then and if you feel that you have the infrastructure and the technology aspects that will address all of this, it means that I'm sorry.
Sure, no worries. So
Sorry,
while
sorry about that. Yeah. So once you do that, it means that you will be able to transition your business completely to an online and a virtual business. So as long as you take care of all of that, you're good.
Sure. I think when we speak of technology, then hardware is not far behind, and we cannot leave China behind, come what may. So I think this is a very relevant question that has come up from the audience, that there is this whole push, especially in India, and I guess a lot of other countries, in terms of not sourcing your hardware from China, not setting up any more manufacturing centers there. So one key question that comes in, especially for newer, younger businesses, is would the market then be ready to absorb the additional costs that may come in for these businesses? One is that I understand larger corporations may have that kind of bandwidth to be able to absorb that cost and may already be able to set up manufacturing centers across other locations in the globe. But what about a small business which is dependent on sourcing from China? And if you were to source from elsewhere, then what about the additional cost? How would those dynamics play out, if you could elaborate for the audience?
Yeah, so when we start to look at this problem about China, and we have to be cautious about the fact that there's not too much jingoism and too much nationalism coming into some of this decision making, right? Because it's all good that we try to be independent, we try to improve our technology, but all said and done, whatever be the situation that we're facing, the reality is that we are living and we continue to live in a connected world, right? And it is a matter of time where all the economies of the world will continue to be reliant on each other as they used to be quite some time. So the nature of doing businesses is definitely going to change, but what is not going to change, in my opinion, is how dependent they are on each other. So if you're looking at this on a positive aspect of building your own capabilities, then there is meaning in all of this discussion, as opposed to excluding one party out of this, right? And therefore, any approach that I would recommend for this does not necessarily exclude interacting or dealing with an entity in China. If I have to, I would do it. I would first try to see whether I could leverage the opportunities that presents itself in this current scenario, and try to maximize the potential that we have as a country, and maybe even seek partners outside to de-risk or to reduce our dependency on countries like China. But if I have to, I would not hesitate to go back and leverage those capabilities. And one must understand that China has been a superpower in many of this, including hardware, including assembly. We can start to build some of these expertise here. We can start to rely on others outside of that, but to completely ignore that would be shooting ourselves in the foot, in my personal opinion. And I believe we need to focus on this. We need to focus on electronics assembly. We need to focus on a lot on building semiconductor fabs. We just have about we have one fab in India, but that's nowhere near the cutting edge technology or the scales that exist in the rest of the world, especially in countries like Taiwan. It's imperative that we build a fab of our own, and that's a very expensive proposition, but that's something that's on the table for consideration right now, and I think that's a good move. So in short, let's keep the jingoism aside and look at it from on a practical and a very professional and business-like manner, and see what's good for our country from a positive aspect rather than coming in from the others.
Any thoughts, Prashant, Balachandran?
Well, I would probably, yes, Arun spoke about we living in a connected world, right? I don't think that any one organization has the total influence over the value chain to determine where the products can be sourced from. Especially if you look at technology today, it has a lot of components. There is the hardware, the software. Having said that, I think I would also say that there are alternatives. There are always alternatives. India was always and China, India was always the go-to location for outsourcing. But now we are being challenged by a lot of cheaper countries in Europe, Latin America, etc. So, I mean, as the countries and businesses mature, there are always alternatives. Yeah, that's it.
Balachandran, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I should confess that I don't have much expertise to give an opinion. Having said that, I think maybe if there are like-minded other enterprises which are importing similar hardware, it could make sense where collective exploration into an alternative can start. At the same time, as Arun rightly said, be very practical and business-like when you want to make sure that your existing supply chain is not severe. That's what I would think.
Sure. I think that was the last question for the day. We're anyway running out of time, so I would request the panelists to just give in their closing comments, and then we can close for the day.
Yeah, perhaps I can start and say, I don't think this is the time to be negative. We have all seen and that yes, there in spite of the pandemic that's happening around us, the resilience of people have shown, have been demonstrated, and we've seen a lot of business thriving and some even flourishing at this time. So I think one thing, a word of advice would be to keep a positive mindset, retain your customer, empathize with them, work with your employees, and and innovate and be and embrace change. Accept the fact that a lot of things are going to change from how it was 3 to 4 months back. And then once we do that, I think we will be in a much better place. That's pretty much all I have.
Yeah, I would probably echo those thoughts. I think take care of your people, your employees. That's very important. I think this is a tough time. Find innovative ways to help the customers. The customers are also going through a tough time. Do not expect them to maybe, give you projects of the same size and scale as you had. Instead of think of different ways in which you can maybe deliver better value at a lower price. And yes, I would also say that we as we come out of this COVID, you will never go back to the old way of working. So certain things, certain way we did work, whether it is delivering projects remotely, needs to be now organized, needs to institutionalize this into their processes and policies. And especially some organizations which probably were a little behind the curve in terms of things like work from home, etc., probably now need to rethink their approach and in this new normal?
Okay, I would say number one, there is clearly a continued trust or an increased trust on digitization. That's going to happen. We speak to many small-time countries or small countries who are, just getting onto the bandwagon. Everyone is very clear that digitization is going to accelerate. So that way, the demand is not going to go away. It's only going to enhance going forward. So it's very important to be there, ready when the actual demand skyrockets. Number two, within India itself, I think there are very interesting technology ecosystems which are coming up. I think next 2-3 years they'll be in place, and everyone should benefit if those ecosystems are in place with the right public infrastructure, so that some of these transactions, some of these new economy systems can work. So both ways, things are not going to look bad at all a couple of years down the line. So right now it's important to stay positive, stay with very tight budgets, and perhaps if possible try to work or try to be very close to at least one anchor customer. If you can do that, that really help, because that'll make sure that your expertise is not going anywhere. You are building on that. Number two, you may get some fund flow in as well. So these are my thoughts.
Thank you, Balachandran. And on behalf of the MA network, I would like to thank Balachandran, Arun, Prashant, and Dr. Naga Hanumaya, who unfortunately is still having a technology glitch, once again for lending their time and expertise to this session. I would also like to thank the audience for their active enrollment, our members for their constant support, and for the backend team for curating this session. Do tune in for our next session on BFSI next week on 28 July from 4:30 p.m. Thank you once again and have a wonderful evening. Stay safe. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you for the panelists.